Okay. So now we're having fun. I mean, okay, this is 11. 11, 11/7. So really, it does accumulate. It just does. And daily. And, I missed it. So there's a funny thing to like 5 days a week. Because you miss it when you don't do it on those other 2 days. And returning to it allows for a freshness. I mean, it's not a science, but 5 out of 7 days for 3 months is a thing. And, it's worth just clocking these things, in the Turn Your Fucking Head documentary, she's 9 months. Well, my contract was 3 months, and I rebuild in 3 weeks, but I don't know when the show is, so I'm just doing this. And 11 is really good, and I'm saying that because like I built my adaptation in 2006. I started rehearsing. I remember my first practice was in a cemetery in Scotland. After I left the Findhorn Foundation. And, I don't think I gave myself a break. I'd have to think about that. But I was rehearsing 5 days a week until I performed it in January of 2007 in Salt Lake City. And subsequently I performed it January 2007 at a coffee shop that my friend owned on 3rd South. A friend from high school. And then Stephen and Brian were there, and they had their space One Mind, and they invited me to have residency at their space in that spring. And Rianne von Cram, Repo, she saw that January performance. I was carrying around a projector and my DVD plant, PLAN capital T, like a 6-minute film I'd made about a substation near Ely, Nevada, a substation in the middle of the desert, next to a mountain. Ryoji Ikeda, Matrix for rooms, all that jazz. But anyway, that was 2007. And, that summer I hosted the first performance at Mark Beard's church on Franklin Street in Catskill. Catskill Collaborative performed News, and my friends choreographed around that endeavor to perform News in Catskill, the town of Catskill. And I remember Oh My, Dance Oh My came out and watched the show. And Christopher, beautiful person. Dance Oh My. I mean, it's a beautiful place, the Catskill Mountains. That's where, Jonah Beaucaire saw that performance, and he knew Laird Thompson and knew that Laird knew News and knew that there were a bunch of people who had just created adaptations of News, and very scrupulously, I think that's the right word, Jonah Beaucaire, with his, might have been like the inaugural season of Shea Bushwick curation. He gave us the Whitney Museum. he had an opportunity to arrange for a show to happen at the Whitney Museum through Shea Bushwick. And Alberto Dennis came on to help Edie Thorell and Laird Thompson and I produce Not the Same Solo, three of us doing our 3 solo adaptations of news. And it was a magical thing. At the Whitney Museum, Deborah Hay was among the first dance artists to perform at the Whitney Museum, so there was another connection in that way, back in the day, years and years, decades before. This is now 2008, January of 2008. I remember the buzz of that show. We wanted to use the downstairs space, and they rearranged, the museum gift shop to allow us to configure a stage. And I was very fascinated in breaking this idea of a fourth wall. So, of course, we put the chairs around basically an empty rectilinear space. And we used some risers. And they were very good and accommodating. They arranged the space as we asked. Edie Thorell did her, I might be saying her last name wrong, her solo out in the outside. And so people, it was quite a crowd we drew. And then, it was reviewed in the New York Times and the Brooklyn Rail and maybe one other publication. Not the Same Solo, well received. People don't, Deborah Hay didn't see it. But that was really, and I remember taking a cab ride with Jonah Beaucaire and just like wishing that there was more dance in museums and that I might be able to do that kind of a thing again. And, it's happened. Liz Gehring has come to do an amazing collaboration with several museums, and I had been seeing dances happen at the Dia Beacon, and not long after that, Anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent that way. What I meant is to give like some exposition, because I'm getting back to my note about this practice and the unfolding nature of a practice and a commitment over time to a regular practice. And I don't have the discipline necessarily to say 8 a.m. go every day, but I have been lucky enough to be able to find the space in my morning in this summer to begin this revisitation. I think that's a better word than reconstruction or rebuild, because it's a revisitation. A build implies something more like choreography, more like plastic choreography. I'll use that word again. I know people hate it, but I just think it's very useful. I don't have any trouble with plastic choreography. I mean plastic in the sense of the plastic arts, consistent in space-time. This, to me, is unique. Deborah Hay seems to really sort of intentionally refrain from creating plastic choreography to navigate these episodes that comprise the dance. And, that's the thing, is I'm revisiting these states. And I remember this from, the performance I did in Tulsa at the Temple of Dance, 3/25, March 25th of, I think it was 2022. I'm probably wrong about that, because things get fuzzy there, but, that was the collaboration I did with Ari and Julie and Marie Romelia and 3:25, News and More at 8. We'll see where this goes, but I am listening for the opportunity to present this in a new way. 20th anniversary, revisiting news And it's useful for me to do this. It's inspiring for me to do this. My journey to New York City was guided by the Solo Performance Commissioning Project. I saw the match. Steve Kester had shown my senior class the match, and that gave me direction. And the reason I met Laird is because I watched him do, I think it was The Ridge. He and Arturo Vidic had, and one other performer who's, maybe it was Marianne. Wow, it might have been. The Ridge, I saw them do it at St. Mark's Church. They had all, I believe, completed their 3 months. And that fall of 2005, I saw them do their adaptations, their solo adaptations at St. Mark's Church. And there was a talk back after, and I approached Laird, and he said, you should look into this. And I did, and I was on for the next summer. And, then I come back, and, Brian Brooks, love him. He wanted me to do this dancing with him, and I did, and he gave me a beautiful solo to do. But I caution all the dancers out there, you start doing this kind of work, and your body's like, what? You want me to do, like, he had this very highly choreographed arm dance where the dancers stood, and you're supposed to swing your arms in the sagittal plane like clockwork. And man, I was good at it, but I couldn't get through it. Because it was so tightly choreographed. We were literally like clockwork. We were literally cogs in a machine. And, this is like on the other end of the spectrum. And of course, beautiful performers can perform it beautifully, but it is like as close to machinery as you can get in terms of, ensemble choreography. And Deborah Hayes' work is like the exact opposite, and like, this is where this is what's happening to me. And I say this because I'm trying to make sense and share with the world, or, the cyberverse or the void, oddly like this self-confession. If no one's listening, I don't mind, because like, for me to say these things and have them documented is meaningful. And I'm up to 13 minutes, but I'm going to keep talking. Because this, I came to this practice with the interest already developed from a deep appreciation of the primary series, Keputabi Joish, Ashtanga Yoga, as a yoga mala, as a continuous prayer of postures, through Vinyasa Krama. And this is with Ujjayi, the Samavriti Ujjayi, the breathing. And I always think of Samyama, Dhyana, Samadhi. And I always think of that. And I really do believe that dance is in some ways this ninth limb of this technology that is Ashtanga Yoga, 8 limbs. I feel like there is a beautiful image of like an octagon that is the base of a kind of octagonal pyramid, and that is dancing. And the idea of n-dimensional organization, multi-dimensional organization, n-dimensional creatures, n-dimensional objects. This is from all of my intense reading. While I was in Ryrie Woodbury Dance Company, I was in a dance company, we would go on tour, and I read the library. I found The Myth of Freedom. I was really into this particular anatomy book. I read John Hagelin's Artificial Intelligence, the very idea. I read about nanotechnology and engines of creation, Eric Drexler. I game theory, complexity by Mitchell Waldorf. Complexity, the science of complex dynamic systems, the relationship between order and complexity. And, of course I was playing a lot of chess, so game theory is there. Chess is like a primary research tool of the AI industry. And just artificial intelligence, what is intelligence? So, all these things are swimming around in my head. And, of course, quantum physics, I was trying to understand the real possibilities that what we knew about the universe and how it was organized were just a very small portion of a greater understanding that's almost impossible, incomprehensible for the human mind, as is a hypercube. And I'm approaching dance this way. And I know this is nothing new. The Grand Union, I know that Steve Paxton had this in mind when he had the men running across the wrestling mats, throwing at each other, colliding. I think, the particle accelerators that allowed us to discover and really find the Higgs boson, to understand subatomic particles and build our models of quarks and muons and, what comprise the objects that atoms are made of. Particle physics and the idea of learning things from a collision, making sense of that chaos, with a particle accelerator. That's an amazing machine built in, Switzerland. We were going to have a particle accelerator in Texas, but it's the United States of America. We don't get to have nice things because we like to spend all of our money on bombs. Okay, there, I said it. It's all related. But I was in Findhorn, Scotland, dancing with the fairies. And I'm grateful to Deborah Hay for that forever. And she's still doing it. My friends just did it with her. I know they were dancing with fairies, whether they like it or not, whether they, I'm grateful to my dear friend Laird Thompson, who is a radical fairy. And I've always, I feel like I have just a deep connection with him, them, and that, these people, Raja Feather Kelly, these people they're that you meet, that you can exist in a space that is special because they believe that it's there and you can both step into it. This is something that I want to go on constructing for myself here in my new life in Salt Lake City with my child, and I'm grateful to my wife, Leslie, who's, has this exciting opportunity with Ryrie Woodbury, where I began, So there it is. That's almost a 20-minute reel. Good luck with that one. What's it called? Clout. Clout. Zero clout. At least I smiled a lot in this video. Maybe some people will watch it. I love you all, and I what I'm really looking forward to is finding that way that I'm able to present my 10 minutes of news again, 20 years later. And because I don't think that these dances have a shelf life. I think that they are probably all worth seeing by everyone in the world. I mean, I believe in Deborah Hay's work. I love it. It this amazing aesthetic that had been outside of everything that I knew up until, I saw the match, thanks to Steve Kester, for showing us as, seniors graduating, something that really would challenge our ideas about what dance is and what it can do. Such a beautiful quartet. Rose Warby is still doing that work. I think Wally Cardona was in that work. You know, I know Chrissa Parkinson. The names, you know, there was another man, 2 men and 2 women. You know, it would be amazing to me if anybody knew where a recording of that was. Maybe the New York Performing Arts Library has a copy of that performance at St. Mark's Church, The Match. For a long while, there was a lot of literature about it online on her website, but her website has changed. But that's the thing, is like the Deborah Hay Dance Company website is still up, and the language on that website is still rich and valid for any dance artist. So, no, I'll say it. Sarah Young and Adele Nickel, they were both just up in Gardner at the Groundworks, you know, residency with Deborah Hay. And that's also sort of become like a kind of wind in my sails. As I've reached out to artists locally here in Salt Lake City. But I'm just going to continue to invest in this simple practice because it is good for me now while I have the time. And I don't, you know, time is funny because it doesn't exist. And then it does. And then it doesn't, and then it does, and then it doesn't, and then it does. The construct of materialism is upon us. Okay.